Today marks 50 years since Saigon fell, officially marking the end of the Vietnam War. In Appleton, a memorial wall dedicated to Wisconsin soldiers killed in that war was officially dedicated today. It's been open since last fall, but that official dedication was held today. It's the first permanent wall in the state that will have every name and photo of service members from Wisconsin who were killed. The creator, a veteran himself, says he hopes people realize the entire state was affected by the war.
Many people don't realize that in Wisconsin there are 72 counties. Of the 72 counties, every county there's at least one veteran or more that was killed in Vietnam. The only county that did not have a veteran that was killed was Iron County.
The memorial is free to visit. It's on the 2500 block of North Richmond Street. It's open year-round, 24/7.